Hi, we're out on our range today, and this is the FK BRNO, commonly called FK BRNO, model PSD pistol. The manufacturer sent me this pistol along with some ammunition, asked me to evaluate it, so here we are. Now this pistol is caliber 7.5 BRNO, and you may ask, what is that? Let's take a close-up look at the ammunition. From your left to right are 9x19, 10mm auto, 357 Magnum, 7.5 BRNO, 357 SIG, 7.62 by 25, and 5.7 by 28. Now that we've seen a close-up of the ammunition, let's take a close-up look at the pistol. According to the manual, this pistol has a 5.3-inch barrel and an overall weight of 38.8 ounces. It also has a 16-shot magazine. This is a single-action autoloader. I'll put a round in the chamber, the hammer is cocked, then you engage the thumb safety very similarly to the way a 1911 works. It does not have an ambidextrous safety. This pistol has what's called a two-stage trigger. You can see there's a lot of slop. Once you take out that slop, then there's a very crisp trigger pull. Again, take out the slop, crisp trigger pull. Now let's see how accurately I can shoot this pistol. And it comes with a very important caveat. The two shots that you saw me shoot as a demonstration of how the pistol works are the only two shots I have fired through this. So obviously I have not zeroed it. So I'll go back 20 yards and I'll shoot our easy shot target, and we'll see right out of the box with no adjustment where our group is, and we'll see the size of group that I can achieve. I fired 7 shots. Here's a group of 6 with one that's a little bit low. That's a flyer, and that really was just me. But remember, this is me shooting offhand at 20 yards. So this is a pretty good group. We also see that in terms of windage, we're absolutely zeroed. But in terms of elevation, we're really pretty high. The aiming point was the center of the X. Now, there could be a few reasons for that, but I think the primary reason is because, according to the manual, this pistol was zeroed at the factory at a distance of 100 meters. So, we'll put up a target, shoot it from 100 meters, and see what kind of results I get. Now, I'll shoot this target from 100 meters, and to take as much of me out of the equation as possible, I will shoot from a rest, and we'll see if we can get that group a little more centered. I have the shot holes covered with the red pasties so they're easier to see. And I fired 10 rounds, and all 10 are on paper, but 2 actually missed the silhouette. Now what we see as far as the group is something I would consider mediocre. And remember, this is me shooting from a rest to take as much of me out of the equation as possible. But we're also seeing that if our aiming point is at the center of the target, we're now seeing that a lot of our shots are a little bit better in terms of elevation. Except for one thing. I wasn't aiming at the center. Because I was concerned that that trend to shoot high might continue, my aiming point was actually down here. So we're still shooting quite a bit high, at least with the 7.5 BRNO 95 grain nose discarding hollow point ammunition. What I'll do now is I'll go back to 100 meters and I'll shoot this target again, but now I'll shoot it offhand. So now when we have not just the firearm, but the shooter in the equation, let's see what kind of results I can get. Now I have the shot holes covered with yellow pasties, and I fired 10 rounds and only 6 are on the target. So although I was doing well at 20 yards, at 100, not so much. Now let's try a different exercise and see what kind of accuracy I can achieve. Now we have a new target set up, and I'll shoot this offhand from 100 meters, but I've changed the sights on the pistol. Let's take a close-up look at them. I've replaced the front sight with a much bigger, higher visibility sight, and replaced the rear notch with a Peep sight. The sights are easy to replace because they're both just dovetailed in and held in place with Allen screws. I have the shot holes covered with the red pasties so they're easier to see. And remember, this is me shooting offhand at about 100 meters, shooting as fast as I think I can hit. I fired 10 rounds and I have 9 hits, all of which are fairly good hits except for this one on the edge. We do have to remember that although the iron sights were hitting high, the Peep sights are also hitting high. A lot of our hits are a little high and I was aiming near the bottom of the target. But it looks like altogether, at least in this exercise, the Peep sights are helping me shoot more accurately and maybe a little bit faster. But what if I were trying to shoot targets that were a lot closer and I was trying to shoot faster and trying to transition from one target to another? Then would the Peep sights be a help or a hindrance? Let's see if we can put that to the test. I have 2 targets set up at 10 yards, and I'll shoot them left, right, left, right, left, right. Then I'll do a magazine change and repeat the drill, and we'll see what kind of accuracy and even more so what kind of speed I can achieve with the Peep sights. Let's take a look at the targets. I have the shot holes covered with yellow pasties so they're easier to see. If you look at the target on your left, you see a reasonably good group. The target on your right, not as good. Something I discovered as I was trying to shoot quickly is that the top of that diamond on the front sight has to be in the center of the rear aperture, like a Peep sight. But going too quickly, I unconsciously treat that like a red dot and put the center of the red in the center of the Peep, and it results in a high shot. There's definitely a learning curve with these Peep sights. So let's try this drill again. So let's see if I can do any better. Now let's take a look at the targets. Now I have the shot holes covered with the blue pasties, and except for this one flyer, which is just me, and yes, that's very annoying, we see that our groups are significantly better. But how do our times compare between the first 12 shots and the second 12 shots? Not enough difference to make a difference. Now, as a basis of comparison, we'll repeat that drill with my Colt government model, caliber 45 ACP. Let's take a look at the targets. Now we have the shot holes covered with the red pasties, so we can see that the groups are comparable. The time, a lot less. So we've discussed the accuracy of this pistol, or at least the accuracy I can achieve with it. Now it's time to discuss the power of the 7.5 Bruno cartridge. And this comes with a couple of caveats. We're going to do a lot of chronographing today. Some people find the chronographing segment tedious. I leave it in the final presentation because so many people ask me to. They want to do the math for themselves. They want to see the numbers as they occur. If you're one of those people who finds this segment tedious, I invite you to fast forward to the part where you see me standing next to the chart with all the numbers on it. Okay, for those who are still here, every shot you've seen me fire so far has been with the 95 grain hollow point projectile. And the number of malfunctions we've had with that projectile has been, I think, 0. But for chronographing, I'm going to start with the 7.5 Bruno loaded with the 101 grain all copper flat nose projectile. And let's see what kind of results we get with it. $2,000. $1983. $2003. $2017. $2017. $1952. $2013. And 1981. Now that sounds like very impressive velocity, but remember it's a 101 grain projectile. So how does that compare with other calibers with similar projectile weights? Let's find out. So again, the velocity of the 7.5 Bruno seemed very impressive, but we have to shoot some other handguns, get some other readings, so we have other velocities with which to compare. This will not be an absolutely perfect comparison, but I think we can at least get close. So we'll start with the Smith & Wesson Model 686-6 caliber 357 Magnum with a 6-inch barrel, which is loaded with Winchester White Box 357 Magnum 110 grain projectile. 9 grains difference in bullet weight, we can live with that. $13.15. $13.33. $13.13. $13.23. And $13.24. Let's try another handgun. Now let's try our Colt government model in caliber 38 Super Auto, which I have loaded with Winchester Silvertip 38 Super Auto 125 grain projectile. $11.74. $11.79. $11.57. $11.78. $11.54. And $11.82. Let's try another gun. Now let's try our Colt government model 45 ACP, which is loaded with Remington Golden Saber 45 ACP 185 grain projectile. $1,024. $1,035. $1,026. $1,000. $1,035. And $1,026. But remember, the FK BRNO fires that 7.5 Bruno cartridge, which is a necked cartridge. Let's see how that compares to some other handguns that shoot necked cartridges. And now our Glock Model 31 caliber 357 SIG, which is loaded with Winchester White Box 357 SIG 125 grain projectile. $13.44. 1339, 1347, 1328, 1338, and 1337. Let's try another handgun. And now a CZ52 in caliber 7.62 by 25, which is loaded with Soleil and Below 7.62 by 25 with an 85 grain projectile. $15.71. $15.22. $14.93. $15.19. $14.88. $15.11. And $15.42. Let's try one more handgun. Now let's try our Ruger 5.7, which I have loaded with Spear Gold Dot 5.7 by 28, 40 grain projectile. $18.10. $17.74. $1,800. $17.98. $17.71. $17.74. And $17.74. When we get two readings of the same reading in a row, we'll typically throw out one of those. Now let's try another gun. And we're back to our PSD pistol, but now it's loaded with 7.5 Bruno with a 95 grain jacketed hollow point. Let's see what kind of numbers we get with this. $20.13. $19.95. $19.73. $19.91. $20.12. $2005. $2010. And $2027. Now, let's go crunch the numbers. Well, I crunched the numbers, and here they are. And of course, this comes with the caveats that chronographs don't always agree with each other, and certain environmental factors like elevation, ambient temperature, and barometric pressure can affect chronograph results. This also comes with the caveat that most of the time when we have a chart like this, I'll memorize all these numbers. Today, there are too many numbers for me to memorize all of them, so I will have to look at the chart once in a while. With that having been said, the results we got are our 7.5 Bruno with its 101 grain projectile gives us a mean velocity of 1,995 feet per second. Now that sounds very impressive for handgun velocity, but again, we have to put it in perspective. Okay, compare it to a 357 Magnum with 110 grain projectile, we get 1,321 feet per second. That does not sound impressive at all. And the 357 Magnum ammunition I was using was not particularly powerful 357 ammo. I used this because with its 110 grain projectile, that was close to the same projectile weight as the 7.5 Bruno. But we see that with the 30 carbine with a 110 grain projectile, we got a mean velocity of 1,528. Now that does sound impressive. Also, side note, people have asked me to do a comparison between 357 Magnum and 30 carbine in handguns. This is not really it. To do a fair comparison, you would need to use ammunition from the same manufacturer and handguns with the same barrel length. Even though these two ammunitions both have 110 grain projectiles, they're different brands of ammunition, and the 357 I was using had a 6-inch barrel, the 30 carbine had a 7.5-inch barrel. So it is not a fair comparison, but still, it's a comparison. Now from there we go to our 45 ACP with a 185 grain bullet and a velocity of 1,024 feet per second. Now that's impressive for a 45 ACP, but still far short of the 1995 of the 7.5 Bruno. Our 38 Super, we see a velocity of 1,170. Our 357 SIG, also with a 125 grain bullet, gives us a velocity of 1,338. Now from here we get into some handgun cartridges with really light bullets. Our 7.62 by 25, we get an impressive velocity of 1,520. That's only 8 feet per second less than the 30 carbine, within the variation of one round to the next. Not enough difference to make a difference. But remember, the 30 carbine has a 110 grain bullet. The 7.62 by 25 has an 85 grain bullet, so that velocity might not be as impressive as it sounds. Now when we get it down to our 5.7 by 28, we see a velocity of 1,787. That is impressive, but remember, that's only a 40 grain bullet. And finally, on the bottom of the chart, we see our 7.5 Bruno with the 95 grain hollow point with a velocity of 2,003. So what can we take from all of these numbers? A few things. First, it would appear that the velocity of the 7.5 Bruno is very impressive. Secondly, when I do chronograph testing like this, the numbers I get are almost always significantly lower than the numbers advertised on the box. Now granted, as I'd said, chronographs don't always agree with each other, environmental factors can affect chronograph results, and the manufacturers may use a different firearm for testing than I'm using. But even at that, I'm getting significantly lower numbers than the advertised velocities, and I call those advertised velocities optimistic. But in this particular case, this 7.5 Bruno ammunition with a 101 grain projectile has an advertised velocity on the box of 1,950 feet per second. We are exceeding that. With the 95 grain projectile, it has an advertised velocity printed on the box of 2,000 feet per second. We're achieving that. So these results are very impressive. But there's something we have to look at here. Our 7.5 Bruno has a velocity of 1995, but that is with a 101 grain bullet. Our 45 ACP is only getting 1,024, but that's with a 185 grain bullet. Much more mass to our bullet. So is the 7.5 Bruno more or less powerful? To really determine power, you have to compute the energy of the projectile, which takes into account the projectile's mass and its velocity. And there's different ways of doing that, but the way I computed this was with energy foot-pounds. And here they are. Now, if I've done my math right, we see that the energy foot-pounds of our 7.5 Bruno with 101 grain projectile is 892. Now, that sounds impressive, but we have to put it in perspective with the others. And when you look at the others, the closest competitor at 570 energy foot-pounds is the 30 carbine, but that's still 322 pounds less than the 7.5 Bruno. That sounds impressive. If we look at our 7.5 Bruno with a 95 grain projectile, it's a little bit less weight, so we have a little bit less energy foot-pounds, 846, which is still a lot more than anything else on the chart. And when we look at our 45 ACP, only 1,024 feet per second, but 185 grain projectile, but that still only comes out to 430 energy foot-pounds. Still less than half of what the 7.5 Bruno is giving us. And when we look at our handgun cartridges like the 5.7 by 28, which have impressive velocity but with very light bullets, we see that that's only giving us 283 energy foot-pounds. Impressive velocity, but a very light bullet. So 7.5 Bruno has very impressive velocity and very impressive energy foot-pounds. But as I've said before, these are just numbers on a chart. How do these numbers really translate into effectiveness on the intended target? Let's see if we can test that. We're going to evaluate the power of the 7.5 Bruno cartridge in a few ways today, but we're going to start with the meat target. Now, for those who haven't seen it before, the meat target is leather couch skin, followed by pork steak pectorals, pork ribs, bags of oranges to simulate lung tissue, more pork ribs on the back, 4 layers of t-shirt on the front, 4 layers on the back, and the whole thing followed by the new and improved high-tech fleece bullet stop. Now, I'm going to shoot from 10 yards with the PSD model pistol, which is loaded with 7.5 Bruno 95 grain jacketed hollow point. Let's see what kind of results we get. Here's the ribs on the front of the target, and we see a lot of damage. Here's the ribs on the back of the target, not nearly as much damage. But between the two, we do see a lot of damage to our orange lung tissue. Now, what we would expect to see is, when the hollow point bullet hits the ribs on the front of the target, it has not expanded yet. But by the time the bullet gets to the ribs on the back of the target, it should be pretty close to full expansion, so we would expect more damage to the ribs on the back of the target. But it often occurs when you're shooting hollow point bullets that are very light and very fast, that they have kind of an explosive reaction on the front of the target, so you get more damage on the front than you do on the back. This also sometimes results in limited penetration. In this case, our bullets all went completely through the meat target. 1 was stopped by the t-shirt on the back of the target, 2 were stopped by the first couple of layers of fleece, and 1 went clear through the meat target and clear through the high-tech fleece bullet stop. So perhaps some inconsistent penetration. But what we really see here is what looks like a lot of damage, and we see a lot of damage to our projectiles. Let's take a close-up look at what's left of our projectiles. And there's what I recovered, and there's still a lot of very small fragments left in the meat target. So the results we got with our 7.5 Bruno hollow points looked impressive, but again, we have to put that in perspective. So I've got a new meat target set up, and I'll shoot this from 10 yards with my Smith & Wesson model 686-6, which is loaded with Remington green and yellow box 357 Magnum 125 grain semi-jacketed hollow point. Let's see how the results compare. Here's our ribs on the front of the target where we see a lot of damage, and here's our ribs on the back of the target where we see comparatively quite a bit less damage. And between the two, a lot of damage to our orange lung tissue. Now in this case, of the 4 projectiles, 1 was stopped by the ribs on the back of the target, and 3 were stopped by the t-shirt on the back of the target. So with the 357 Magnum, it looks like we're seeing very similar results as to what we got with the 7.5 Bruno. But now let's take a close-up look at these projectiles. And here's our 4 357 Magnum projectiles, and we can see excellent expansion, and 1 lost its jacket. Now I have a new meat target set up, and I have the PSD pistol loaded with the 7.5 Bruno 101 grain all copper flat nose. I'll shoot this from 10 yards, and let's see what kind of effect we get. Well, we see a lot of damage to the ribs on the front of the target, and with our all copper flat nose, we see more damage to the ribs on the back of the target than we did with the hollow point, and where the projectiles actually hit ribs, just shattered them. Now between our ribs, we see a pretty good amount of damage to our orange lung tissue, but significantly less than what we saw with the hollow points. But the greatest difference that I'm seeing between the hollow points and the flat nose ammunition is, as where all the hollow points were stopped by the first few layers of fleece, all of the flat noses penetrated all 48 layers of fleece. So that's either really good penetration or terrible over-penetration, depending on how you look at it. Now I'll put the performance of that 7.5 Bruno 101 grain all copper flat nose in perspective by shooting this new meat target from a distance of 10 yards with my Colt government model, which is loaded with 45 ACP 230 grain full metal jacket round nose. So with the 45, I knocked it off the table after 2 shots, but now I set it up again. Let's try a couple more shots. Our ribs on the front of the target just have 45 caliber holes in them. Our oranges just have 45 caliber holes in them. Our ribs on the back of the target just have 45 caliber holes in them. And all of these bullets were stopped right around the 30th layer of fleece. So we saw that our 7.5 Bruno with the 101 grain all copper flat nose projectile did a lot more damage to the meat target and had a lot more penetration through our new and improved high-tech fleece bullet stop. But let's take a close-up look at these 45 projectiles. And there they are, with virtually no deformation. When we shoot the meat targets, those are intended as an analog for the thoracic cavity of an adversary. But the PSD pistol has other applications. When I talked to the company representative, a man named Elvis, he told me, quote, "It's not a concealed carry piece, it's a bear killer," close quote. So let's put that to the test with our bear meat target. Now this will simulate the thoracic cavity of a bear when you're shooting him from the side. So on the front we have 2 layers of leather couch skin, followed by beef ribs, 2 bags of oranges to simulate both lungs, more beef ribs on the back, fur on the front, fur on the back, and the whole thing followed by the new and improved high-tech fleece bullet stop. And I'll shoot this from 10 yards with a PSD pistol, which is loaded with 7.5 Bruno 95 grain jacketed hollow point. Now let's see what kind of results I get. Here's the ribs on the front of the target, and we see extensive damage where the projectiles actually hit ribs, pulverized them. We also see a great deal of damage to our orange, in this case mostly grapefruit lung tissue, in our first lung. But when we go to our second lung, we see a significant reduction in the amount of damage in our second lung as compared to our first. And as far as damage to the ribs on the back of the target, there's basically none. Only 1 projectile actually made it through to the ribs on the back of the target, and it didn't do any damage. It was just stopped by the ribs on the back of the target. I didn't really recover any whole projectiles, just lots of bits and fragments scattered all through the target. So although this 95 grain hollow point seems to have a lot of effect on our adversary meat target, on our bear meat target we see a lot of damage to begin with, but perhaps insufficient penetration. Now let's take a close-up look at what I was able to recover in terms of projectiles. And here's some of the fragments I recovered. This is the closest thing to a whole bullet I recovered, and that's what was stuck against the ribs on the back of the target. Now I have a new bear meat target set up, and again, just as a basis of comparison, I'll shoot this from 10 yards with the Smith & Wesson 686, which is loaded with Remington green and yellow box 357 Magnum 125 grain semi-jacketed hollow point. And we'll see how the results compare. Here's the ribs on the front of the target. I fired 4 shots, 1 skimmed over the top of the target, so there's only 3 good hits. And we see a lot of damage where the projectiles hit ribs, shattered them, but not as much damage as what we saw with the 7.5. Now with our grapefruit lung tissue, our first lung has a lot of damage and there's a lot of projectile fragments. But with our second lung, we see the exact same results as we saw with the 7.5, a lot fewer fragments and a lot less damage. What's really interesting is the ribs on the back of the target. As where with the 7.5, 1 projectile made it to the ribs and was stopped by the ribs, with the 357 Magnum, 1 projectile made it through to the ribs on the back and was actually stuck in a rib a little bit. So what we see is similar damage, similar penetration, similar fragmentation. Let's take a look at the projectiles I was able to recover. And here we see 1 good piece of bullet and 1 jacket, and there's a lot of fragments scattered all through the target. Now I have a new bear meat target set up, and I'll shoot this from 10 yards with our 7.5 Bruno 101 grain all copper flat nose. Now let's see what kind of penetration we get. Here's the ribs on the front of the target. We can see quite a bit of damage, and where the projectiles hit ribs, shattered. Our first grapefruit lung has a lot of damage. Our second grapefruit lung still has a lot of damage. The ribs on the back of the target, every one of the projectiles achieved 100% penetration. Where they hit the ribs, broke them. And every one of the projectiles achieved 100% penetration through our fleece bullet stop. So it looks like we found our bear killer ammunition. But again, in all fairness, we'll put together a new bear meat target, shoot it with a 45 ACP, just as a matter of comparison. Upon closer examination, I found that one of the all-copper projectiles was stuck in the fleece bullet stop. And there it is. So now I'll shoot this bear meat target from 10 yards with the Colt Government Model 45 ACP 230 grain full metal jacket round nose, and let's see how our results compare now. And we see that the ribs on the front of the target have 45 caliber holes through them, where projectiles hit ribs, broke them. Our grapefruit lung tissue, for the most part, just has 45 caliber holes through them. Ribs on the back of the target have 45 caliber holes through them, where projectiles hit ribs, broke them, and all of the projectiles were stopped by the first layer of fleece on the back of the target. But let's take a close-up look at these 45 projectiles now. Here's our 45 projectiles, and we see that most of them have some deformation. I'm going to conclude that that's because the beef ribs are far more robust than the pork ribs were, thus able to do some damage to our hardball projectiles. So we see our 7.5 Bruno, when loaded with 101 grain all-copper flat nose, can penetrate a lot. But what about its ability to penetrate body armor? Well, we've got our favorite target, soda jugs, and they represent you. And you're wearing 2A body armor. I'm going to shoot this from 10 yards, and I'm going to start with my Colt Government Model, which is still loaded with 45 ACP 230 grain full metal jacket round nose. And remember, sometimes even when the bullet does not penetrate the body armor, there's enough concussion to crack the soda jug. So if you see soda leaking, reserve judgment until after we do the necropsy. Our 2A body armor stopped both of our 45 projectiles. Let's take a close-up look at them. And there they are, and they are mushroomed quite a bit. So although there was enough concussion to crack the first two soda jugs, we see that in the case of 45 versus 2A, the winner is 2A. So let's set this up again and try something else. So now we have a new U and a new piece of 2A body armor, and I'll shoot this from 10 yards with the Smith & Wesson 686-6, which is loaded with the Remington 357 Magnum 125 grain semi-jacketed hollow point. Let's see if the 2A body armor can stop this. Even though that projectile stripped the body armor off the target and cracked one of the soda jugs, the 2A body armor did stop the projectile from the 357. So now we've got a new U set up, the same piece of body armor. I'll shoot this again from 10 yards with the 357, and we'll see if it can stop our second projectile. So again, it cracked the soda jug, but again, the 2A body armor stopped the 357 Magnum projectile. Let's take a close-up look at these. One of them is mushroomed a lot, the other one is mushroomed almost completely flat, and it lost its jacket. So we see that 2A body armor is adequate to stop moderately powerful handguns, but the 7.5 Bruno is advertised as being able to penetrate 3A body armor at a range of 100 meters. So what I've got set up over here is we're back to our adversary meat target, which is leather jacket skin, pork steak pectorals, pork ribs, a bag of oranges to stimulate lung tissue, more pork ribs on the back, but instead of wearing his typical 4 layers of t-shirt, he's wearing 3A body armor. And the whole thing's followed by the new and improved high-tech fleece bullet stop. So I've got the PSD pistol loaded with 7.5 Bruno with the 101 grain all-copper flat nose, and I'll shoot this target from a distance of 100 meters, and we'll see if the projectile can penetrate the 3A body armor and how much damage it can do to the target after it does. I said I was going to shoot from 100 meters. You saw 2 iterations of fire. The first was from 50 meters, the second was from 100. Now, when shooting from 50 meters, some of our projectiles hit the 3A body armor, and the results we got were we saw a lot of holes in the back of the chair. When shooting from 100, we got some new hits, but no new holes in the back of the chair, so the bullets should be in here somewhere. One of the shots fired from 100 hit the body armor right here. It penetrated the body armor but missed the meat target, just hitting the fleece bullet stop, and it was stopped by about the 30th layer of fleece. As far as what the rest of the bullets did, we'll find out when we get our patient on the table. I've got our meat target taken apart, and this might look like an exceptionally big meat target. I added material to make it wider to compensate for my lack of accuracy with this pistol at 100 meters, but in terms of thickness, it's the same adversarial meat target we were using a while ago. Now, when I was shooting from 50 meters, of those shots that hit the body armor, they all went through. They also went through the meat target, through the high-tech fleece bullet stop, and most of them went out the back of the chair. One was stopped by about the 35th layer of fleece. When shooting from 100 meters, all but one of the projectiles that hit the body armor went through it. So this body armor was hit by a total of 11 projectiles when you combine our 50 and 100 meter shots. 10 of the 11 went through. At 100 meters, those shots that went through the body armor still had enough power left to do some damage to you. Here's some of the ribs from the front of the target, and we can see quite a bit of damage. We see moderate damage to our orange and grapefruit lung tissue. And as far as penetration, when shooting at 100 meters, one of the projectiles was stopped by the ribs on the back of the target. A couple of them were stopped by the first layer of fleece, and the rest went through anywhere from the 20th to 30th layer of fleece. So, shooting the 7.5 Bruno loaded with the 101 grain all copper flat nose, when the question is asked, will it penetrate 3A body armor? Yes, it will. Will it penetrate 3A body armor at a distance of 100 meters? Yes, it will, almost every time. After penetrating the 3A body armor at a distance of 100 meters, does it have enough power left to do significant damage to you? Yes, it does. And here's the projectiles I was able to recover. Some of them have a little bit of deformation, but most of them have a level of deformation that's down there pretty close to zero. Typically when I review firearms, I do not discuss disassembly and reassembly. Usually it's very conventional and often boring. However, with the FK BRNO PSD pistol, I don't think it will be either of those things. Now, the first thing I want to tell you in disassembling this pistol is read the manual. There's some easy to follow instructions that make taking it apart very simple. If you don't read the manual, taking it apart might take a while to figure out. The second thing I'd tell you is something that should go without saying, and that is make sure that the pistol is clear before you try to disassemble it. After you've done that, leave the safety disengaged, and you'll see 2 indents, one on the frame, one on the slide. Slide the slide back until those indents line up, then engage the safety and it'll hold it in that position. Then use the magazine to pop out your pin. Now disengage the safety and the slide should come right off. Take out the spring, take out this weighted buffer, take out the barrel. Very simple. Here's where it gets interesting. Instead of putting in the 7.5 BRNO barrel back in, I'm going to put in this 10mm auto barrel. And when I do, the first thing I discover is that it doesn't quite fit. I have to use a specialized tool that does not come with the pistol to get it in there. There we go. Once we get that in place, reassembling the pistol is pretty easy. Have to make sure that's in just the right position. Slide that back. Now slide it back to where the slide would be under normal circumstances. Put in the pin. Then line up your 2 indents, engage the safety, put the pin back in, and we're back in business. But putting in the 10mm auto barrel brings up some questions, such as, will the pistol function correctly with the 10mm barrel? Will this barrel hold a good group? And third, where will that group be? I have it zeroed with the 7.5 barrel. Will the 10mm barrel hit in the same place? Let's go to the target and find out. When I shot from 20 yards with the 7.5 BRNO barrel, I hit a little bit high. Now I'll shoot from 20 yards with the 10mm barrel, and we'll see where the group is and how big the group is. And we see that our group is not in the same place and not nearly as good. I'll put up a new target and try that again. So here's our group, if you can call it that. And we see that our group is not in the same place with the 10mm as it was with the 7.5 Bruno, and isn't nearly as good, at least not with me shooting it. Let's try something else. Now I have a new target set up, and I have the PSD pistol fitted with the 9x19 barrel. The 7.5 Bruno and the 10mm barrels use the same spring and the same magazine. The 9x19 barrel uses a different spring, a different magazine, and it's recommended that you use 9x19 plus P ammunition. So I have the PSD pistol loaded with the Spear Gold Dot 9x19 plus P 115 grain jacketed hollow point. Now I'll shoot from 20 yards and we'll see how the pistol performs in terms of location of group, size of group, and reliability. And now our group's in a different place and not particularly good, although the pistol did function correctly. Let's try a different type of 9mm ammo. Now I have a new target set up, and I have the PSD pistol loaded with Fiocchi 9x19 115 grain full metal jacket round nose. Not only is this ammunition not plus P, even as standard pressure ammunition goes, it's not particularly powerful. So I'll shoot with this from 20 yards and we'll see how we do in terms of accuracy and reliability. So I fired 15 rounds, mediocre group, and 4 malfunctions. 3 failures to eject, 1 failure to feed. All of those caused because the ammunition was not powerful enough to work the slide efficiently. So if you're going to use 9x19 ammunition in your PSD pistol, you really should stick with plus P. Now I have a new target set up, and I'm back to the 7.5 barrel and the 95 grain hollow point. Let's shoot this from 20 yards. We see that our group is high, there's 1 flyer, that's just me, but we also see that with the 7.5, my group is much better than it was with the 10mm or the 9mm. Now there's a few things I need to add. First, I've been calling this ammunition 7.5 BRNO. If you actually read the box, it's 7.5 FK. Just calling it 7.5 BRNO helped me to communicate the differences between the ammunitions. Another thing is I have to talk about the reliability of this pistol. We saw that the reliability suffered with the 9x19 standard pressure ammunition, but with the 7.5 FK ammunition, I fired over 200 rounds of the 95 grain hollow point, and the total number of malfunctions was 0. In firing the 7.5 ammunition with the 101 grain all copper flat nose, I had 1 failure to feed. But there were quite a few failures of one other kind. You may have noticed them, and that was just failure to fire. Now what happened was, I had round in the chamber, disengaged the safety, pull the trigger, and it just didn't go off. Try again. It just didn't go off. And then by the time I tried the 3rd or 4th time, sometime it would go off and sometimes it would not. And I was getting light primer strikes, but only with the ammunition loaded with the 101 grain all copper flat nose. Well, looking at the ammunition, I could see that some of the cartridges appeared to have primers that were seated too deeply in the casing. By such a minute amount, it was barely discernible with the unaided eye, but it was just enough to give me light primer strikes. I think it was just a bad lot of ammunition. But all told, I'm going to have to say that the PSD pistol was very reliable until we got to the standard pressure 9x19 ammunition, which of course the manual says use the plus P, and with a plus P it worked just fine. But did you notice that we lost a lot of accuracy in using the 10mm and the 9mm barrels? The groups I was able to achieve at 20 yards with the 7.5 ammunition were not bad. With the 9 and 10 were not good at all. So even though that does give the pistol some degree of versatility, it comes at a cost. Now, speaking of cost, that's a topic I don't like to discuss because the prices of guns and ammunition can vary so much from one location to the next, and these days can vary so much from one day to the next. So I'm not going to discuss cost, except to say that the PSD pistol and the 7.5 FK ammunition are both quite expensive. But when we looked at the power of the 7.5 cartridge in relation to shooting our meat targets, we saw that shooting at relatively short distances at the meat target, the hollow point 7.5 didn't seem to do a whole lot more damage than hollow point 357 Magnum. However, in shooting the meat target with the all copper projectile, especially shooting the bare meat target, we saw a great deal of penetration, and that can be a big plus. And talking about penetration, we saw that 2A body armor could stop 357 Magnum and 45 ACP at really short ranges. But 3A body armor was not able to stop the 101 grain all-copper flat nose at a distance of 100 meters. And not only did that projectile go through the body armor, it still had enough power left to do quite a bit of damage to the meat target behind the body armor. So we see that the 7.5 FK ammunition is very powerful. But would it really give you any advantage over any other types of firearms and ammunition? Lots of handguns are powerful. And I can say that in my opinion, if I were going to hunt deer with a handgun in this environment, I don't think the PSD pistol would give me any advantage over my .357 Magnum revolver. But where it might give you an advantage is if you had to shoot a significantly longer distance than I expect to shoot here, a distance of maybe 200 meters or even 300. The 7.5 FK ammunition was generating velocities around 2,000 feet per second. That's a lot more than .357 Magnum or .357 SIG. That's even greater than the velocity I can achieve with 5.7 by 28. And it's not only more velocity than the 5.7, but the 7.5 achieves that greater velocity with a much larger diameter, much heavier projectile. So if you were going to do handgun hunting at really long distances, I think it would be a great choice. The PSD pistol in caliber 7.5 FK is represented as a bear killer. And I'm going to have to say, based on our results here today, it probably is. Now there's some other applications of this pistol to take into consideration. When I say things like, it wouldn't give me an advantage over my .357 revolver in an environment like this, we also have to take into consideration that my .357 Magnum revolver has a 7-shot cylinder. This pistol has a 16-shot detachable box magazine. And some people perceive that if they got into certain situations, that could give them a great advantage. And it can. Another advantage that I perceive may come from the PSD pistol in caliber 7.5 FK is if you were in a situation where you thought you would have to face an adversary that was wearing body armor. Now, I've discussed this in previous presentations, but the short version is, when would you ever have to defend yourself against an adversary that was wearing body armor? Well, perhaps in a military application. But from every source I've ever been able to see, people who commit armed robberies and who rob gas stations or convenience stores, they will almost never be wearing body armor. But people who rob things like armored cars, there's a far greater chance they will be wearing body armor. And if you were an armored car driver and you could deal with the 38+ ounce weight of the PSD pistol, it could give you a real advantage. So there are definitely some pluses to this pistol. Now there's a few things to add beyond the pistol, and that is, first, I really want to thank FK BRNO for giving me this pistol to test. And I want to say, personally, Elvis, thank you for getting me this gun, and I'm sorry about all the stuff you had to put up with getting the gun and the ammunition to me. But that having been said, the real bottom line of the FK BRNO PSD pistol in caliber 7.5 FK is this. It's got some real pluses and a few minuses. And is it the right gun for me? I'm going to say in some situations, yes. Is it the right gun for you? You be the judge. And as always, don't try this at home on what you call a professional. And thanks for watching the FK BRNO PSD pistol review.